Alright, so I'm in Lisbon today, and what I'm gonna do is I want to take a bit of time to record another video. Can you hear that? Yeah, the music of Lisbon. So what I wanted to talk today about is I wanted to talk a bit more about three top principles that I keep at the back of my mind whenever I write some jokes. So let's go. Top three principles I use for comedy. Go! Okay, so in Lisbon, Portugal. Okay guys, so the reason why I wanted to talk about these three concepts is because there's such fundamental concepts in my opinion to writing stand-up, and the number one concept that I kind of always think about and is so important for just kind of like getting it right, getting the laughs per minute and getting everything in the right place is compression. Compression is effectively, stand-up in itself is the art of communicating. It's a higher art form. It's a communication at its finest. It's about communicating as much as possible with as little words as possible, right? So when it comes to compression, it's so important for everything you do in day-to-day life to kind of just say what you mean, right, and say what you want to say. But it's difficult to kind of communicate that because different inhibitions and so on and so forth. So comedy is the same thing. It's like getting stuff from inside of yourself and communicating it directly in short format, like compressing. And I think like the best example of compression that I have is the joke where I say that I believe in Jesus, but Jesus doesn't believe in me, because it really packs a lot into that. Packs a lot of feelings, packs a lot of background, packs a lot of story, right? So kind of like, and when the audience kind of deciphers, because I think that's what it is. You are giving the audience like a WinRAR file, like an archive, and then they basically unpack it, and then they have that feeling of discovering what's inside. They're like, oh shit, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Or maybe you don't know what I mean. But that's why compression is so difficult, because you are literally encoding a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings, a lot of history, a lot of background into this really neat archive, which is the joke, and then you're presenting it to the audience to decipher. And when they decipher it, they get the serotonin hit. So that's one of the concepts that I value, that I think is very important for stand-up. I hope that makes sense. I kind of blabbered a bit on, but I hope it does make sense. All right, moving on to the number two most important concept, in my opinion, for stand-up. All right, guys. So still in Lisbon. Look at that. I'm next to the water, but I found somewhere somewhat quiet to kind of do the number two most important concept. So a lot of people call this concept clarity, which means that whatever you have to communicate has to be easily understood by the audience. The audience needs to understand what you're talking about, right? Like they need to be able to kind of process what is the thing that you're referring to. But I think I would rename it recognition, and this is, a lot of times people will laugh because they recognize what you're saying. I have that information already stored in my brain, so I recognize what you're saying. So some people call it clarity, but I call it recognition. So the second most important concept is recognition. And a lot of times, yeah, just people, they identify. You are on the same page. You've had the same experience as them. You've seen the same car. You've seen the same dog. You know what it is. And a lot of times, that kind of matching of information and of memories is enough to kind of create a report and generate laughter, believe it or not. Sometimes it's as easy as that. Do I know what this guy is talking about? So for example, I've seen a couple of a lot of my material is somewhat more Eastern European oriented. Sometimes we get people that don't speak perfect English at the show, and I do have a joke where I say Scooby-Doo, and people just laugh because I say Scooby-Doo and because they recognize what I say. And sometimes it's that easy. So do try to think of when you're writing jokes, try to think like, do people know what I'm talking about? Can people recognize the words that are coming out of my mouth? Simple as that. All right, I think Lisbon is getting a bit wild. All right, moving on to the number three most important concepts, in my opinion. Well, that was a pretty aggressive hike. I went up the city here. Nice. So let's get to the third one, the last one, the most important one. The one that generates the punchlines, the principle of contrast. Damn, man, contrast is a really important one, because it really is just making your brain work in overtime, and it makes it like create those connections required for like basically solving the puzzle that is the joke. Let me give you an example of contrast, how contrast creates punchlines. So for example, people got so mad about the whole global warming thing. They got so mad, they left a comment on YouTube. See, the contrast is between getting mad and leaving a comment, something that is disproportionate. So I use contrast in that way to create a lot of punchlines, quick reversals, like the I believe in Jesus, Jesus doesn't believe in me. Contrast. And I also try to basically kind of like, whenever I'm like in a pinch, and I'm in a pinch, and I don't know what kind of punch I have to create, I just think, maybe I should use the opposite of what the premise is, which is basically contrast. Because the human mind reacts very funny to contrast, man. It's basically, it doesn't fall within its pattern of matching, words together, and it's like, this shouldn't go together, and then it kind of pauses for a bit and tries to unravel the puzzle, which basically that's what a joke is. It's a puzzle at the end of the day, right? And contrast is the easiest way to kind of create the puzzle. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope that makes sense. So we got compression, recognition, and contrast. So yeah, let me know if that makes sense. If you guys have any comments, please feel free to leave the comments, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Monday I have the new crowd work video coming out, so check that one out as well. And also check out my podcast, the Labrador Energy Podcast. The last one was pretty fun. I had a chat with Marta, who is Polish and moved to Argentina to make bread illegally. So yeah, fun times, Labrador Energy. Alright guys, thanks a lot. See you next time.